Hey friends, welcome back. So I've found that in my reading life, I tend to always be looking for books that are kind of like a Jane Austen-esque satire, and the thing is, it's kind of hard to find those. One of the reasons for that is it's not like the typical just satirical novel, like you have like books that are satirical and then you have Jane Austen satirical, right? And Jane Austen satirical is typically, funny, witty, heartfelt, critical of a culture, but still participating in that culture and completely okay and appreciative of that, but not letting up on the criticism too much, right? And those are kind of hard to find because it's a little bit of a niche. So I was really happy when I got my July Book of the Month box, and I had picked out The Windfall by Diksha Basu, and I felt that it fell into that niche perfectly. So if you're looking for something like this, something kind of Jane Austen-y but set in India, this might be the book for you. Roll the intro. The Windfall is basically a story about a family who comes into a large amount of wealth in India. The husband sells his website, and he sells it for a whole bunch of money, and so they move from their kind of poor neighborhood into a rich neighborhood, into this mansion. And so the whole story is kind of this culture shock with this satire of what it means to be always trying to keep up with the Joneses, one of those types of stories. And so what unfolds from this tale of wealth is basically this sweet, engaging, funny, but also sometimes really sad and very critical story of family and money and culture and all of those things. One of the things that most impressed me about this book was the fact that, satire in general is really hard to write, but this is an especially good satire, which is even harder to write. What this book does and what Jane Austen does is engage in something that's specifically cultural and making some pretty sharp and critical observations of it while still engaging in what makes that culture unique and genuine. And this book does that so well, and I think that takes a very specific grace that not all authors have. So I was really impressed with how well the author represented her culture in a way that was not really scathing but sharp, but still had a lot of really heartfelt moments that made you realize that she still appreciates the culture that she's a part of. She just has some criticisms about it. Basu does a particularly good job in this book of really showing the differences and the intricacies between being poor and being rich, and pointing out that there are issues with both. Going from being poor to being rich in India is not really as simple as it sounds. You don't just get a whole bunch of money and suddenly everything's different. The culture of rich people is a lot different than the culture of poor people. Basu does a really good job in this book of showcasing how those differences can make somebody who has a lot of money all of a sudden still feel like an outsider, despite the fact that they are as rich as that other person or that other family. Basu does this with a lot of grace and a lot of love and a lot of humor. And this book has some really amazing one-liners in it that just had me like cracking up and wanting to write them down, like for some sort of quote board or something, because she has such sharp, witty things to say about all of these class issues, gender roles, things like that. One of my favorite things about reading in general, and especially about this book, is diving into a culture that is really unfamiliar to me. I don't really know a lot about Indian culture. I've seen some Bollywood movies. I really like the food, but I don't know much else. And I don't really know anything about people's everyday activities or just like the way they treat each other or anything like that. And this book is so beautifully written that we get these like incredible settings described to us. We get these home settings too, which I think is even more interesting than just like a description of a city, for example. I love seeing the inner workings of someone's home and how that deeply affects someone's culture. And this book really made me want to go visit India and see these things happen in real life and really immerse myself in that culture. Even though this book aims to satirize this culture and these characters, it does so in a way where I can see the criticisms of those characters, but they have such genuine problems, such real concerns, such strong personalities that you can't help but love them, even though you're watching them make some like really embarrassing mistakes sometimes. I think that's one of those things that a lot of satire really misses on. You see these characters, but they feel like tropes. They feel like kind of cardboard cutouts of what these characters are supposed to be because they're so exaggerated. This is one of the satires that doesn't do that. These characters feel real. They feel like people you could actually meet, and I love that in a satire because I think it makes the whole criticism more realistic. I think I only have one real complaint about this book, and that's that sometimes the characters' motivations are a little bit hard to read. Because they're so realistic, sometimes their motivations are a little bit muddy, a little bit confusing, because real people are a little bit confusing. But we don't always see real people's actions day in and day out, so it doesn't really matter if they're that confusing. Because we're actually observing these people in the book, there are moments where I was just kind of like, why is he doing that? I'm not totally sure what the point of this is, but those moments were few and far between, and so they really didn't impact the way that I read this book. So all in all, this is a book that I'd really highly recommend to anybody who's a big fan of Jane Austen, a big fan of satire in general, or a fan of Indian culture, because you're going to get a lot of all those things in this book. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I thought it was funny. I thought it was sad. There were parts where I wanted to cry and parts where I was actually laughing out loud. It's a great book, and I would highly recommend this to pretty much anybody. Thanks so much for watching my video about The Windfall by Diksha Basu. I really hope that you read it because I enjoyed it so much. And if you do read it, let me know in the comments what you think about it. Please like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.